For more than 150 years, couples have chosen to sanctify their love for one another at St Patrick's, Church Hill. In the years that follow, many return to have their children baptised. The baptism of baby Claudia Catherine is especially significant. She has family links to a convict blacksmith once known as the Wexford Pikemaker. His name was William Davis, and he stands a giant in the history of St Patrick's. The story goes back to the Irish Rebellion of 1798, when anti-British hostility erupted across Ireland. As a blacksmith, Davis was suspected of forging weapons for the uprising. He was arrested and convicted, seemingly without trial, and transported for life. Davis was one of 133 political prisoners who boarded the vessel Friendship in 1799, bound for a colony halfway round the world, never to return. But in colonial Sydney, Davis was to flourish. He married fellow convict Catherine Miles, a bold and spirited woman who successfully petitioned Governor Macquarie for her husband's pardon. The couple quickly prospered. They acquired land at Church Hill and built a cottage. Their home would become a secret hub of Catholicism in the early colony.
Hello there, I'm Geraldine Doog and I'm here to meet Marist priest Father Michael Whelan. Hello Michael.
Hi Geraldine.
Here at this significant location in the life of St Patrick's. So what's the story?
It's a marvellous story, Geraldine. It's a story of people, of frailty, humanity. It's a story of buildings too, which symbolise so much of the hopes and the desires of those people. Bishop Polding in 1840, in August of 1840, stood somewhere here, climbed up on a rock, as they said, pointed to that cottage over there and said, "The mysteries of our faith were cradled and hidden here."
Wow. And that was the beginning?
That was the beginning.
The
man who owned that cottage was William Davis, who donated the land on which St Pat's now stands. Do you want to come and have a look?
I will.
Okay.
I will.
Father Michael Whelan was appointed parish priest of St Patrick's in 2016. He's one of a band of Marist fathers who currently serve here. So, I've never been down here.
Yes. Well, they uncovered these stones, obviously the footings of a house.
Right.
We're thinking these footings probably go back to the first 20 years of the 19th century.
Right.
Davis had his...
the early years of the colony, really?
Absolutely. 1816, Davis Cottage was already built and here, and was one of the sites, at least one of the sites of the Blessed Sacrament being preserved here in 1818.
Quite something, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
It was here in the Davis Cottage and other Catholic homes that renegade priest Father Jeremiah O'Flynn conducted a clandestine ministry in the colony. When O'Flynn arrived in November 1817 with Vatican credentials, but no authority from the British Colonial Office, Governor Macquarie forbade him from performing priestly duties.
But he'd said Mass and baptised people, contrary to Governor Macquarie's wishes.
But his ministry was to be short-lived. Governor Macquarie ordered O'Flynn's arrest in May 1818.
So when he was deported, the Blessed Sacrament was left probably in a house, maybe here.
Really?
In May of 1818, yeah, 200 years ago. And that's
quite moving,
really,
isn't it?
It is, it's amazing. Now, another place where the Blessed Sacrament could have been held is in the Dempsey Cottage, which is over the ridge, over the hill, roughly where Kent Street and Erskine Streets meet now.
After O'Flynn was deported, devout Catholics continued to gather secretly for worship in the Davis and Dempsey houses, as depicted here by Sydney artist Paul Newton.
Gee.
So it's...
And that kept hope alive, as it were.
Oh, it did. And interestingly enough, Geraldine, it was the lay people.
Yeah.
It was not the clergy that kept the church going in those years.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a real model for us, actually.
yeah, and I'd love us some to find ways, and we're thinking about this, how we can celebrate that, acknowledge it and mark it.
So now, Michael, where are you taking me now?
We're going down into the lounge room of Archdeacon McEncroe.
Right.
It would be one of the few 1860s lounge rooms still existing. It's quite amazing,
wow,
really. Yeah.
look at this.
It's just
That
incredible.
is really, isn't that great?
You get a sense of being there.
Yes.
Just watch your head.
Okay, keeping my head very... Oh, look at the old fireplace, Michael.
Yeah,
My goodness. Fancy that being here.
yeah.
So, Michael, tell me more about this William Davis.
He arrived here as a prisoner. Over the years, he went from rags to riches. He became a very wealthy man, actually. He married a wonderful, an extraordinary woman, Catherine. They never had any children. But I think, like two highly talented, energetic, strong-willed people, entrepreneurial, they had their conflicts, and there was, that's an interesting story in its own right. William Davis was an intensely pious man. It was an offence to practice your faith as a Catholic in the colony in those early days until 1820. William Davis almost certainly was flogged because he refused to go to a Protestant service. It was not uncommon, and it seems that William Davis suffered grievously for his faith.
In 1817, his fellow colonists presented Davis with a porcelain statue of Christ in sympathy for the sufferings he endured for his faith.
So we can assume he was very committed and very faithful.
Indeed.
In 1820, two men arrived to relieve the plight of Sydney's early Catholics. Father John Joseph Terry, here photographed many years later, and Father Philip Connolly. They were the first officially appointed priests to the colony. Governor Macquarie granted land to build a chapel on the edge of town, and the two priests set about raising funds to build the original St Mary's. William and Catherine Davis were major benefactors. By the time it was completed in 1834, Sydney now had a bishop, and by the late 1830s there was growing fervour for a second Catholic church in the colony, one that would honour St Patrick. So St Mary's already existed.
Yes.
Was it a perception that there was a church needed for the Irish or something?
They were looking for a second church. They only had one church in the entire colony that was a Catholic church. So they had decided to build a church, but they needed land. They approached the government, and the government said, sorry, we're not going to give you any land. So at that point, William Davis stepped forward and said, well, you're going to have paddock alongside my house down here in the rocks. And they took that up. They had
His own land.
His own land. And they had this amazing 5-hour religious ceremony on the 25th of August in 1840, starting with Mass at the cathedral, a choral high Mass, which Monsignor Ullathorne celebrated. And this procession of many, many thousands of people down from St Mary's Cathedral to here. And it was at that point that that Bishop Polding got up on the rock and declared that cottage over there held the secret and the mystery of our faith, and cradled it.
By this time, Davis had acquired great wealth as a hotelier and a pastoralist with extensive livestock and land holdings. Having provided the land, he also donated a vast amount of cut stone, which would form the lower part of the church. But when the foundation stone was laid, he did something that astonished everyone.
And at that point, you can imagine the drama of it all. William Davis came up with a cheque for £1,000 and put it on the foundation stone and said, that's my contribution.
Sadly, Davis was not destined to see his dream realised. He died just months before construction was completed. His funeral was held at St Mary's Cathedral.
He was known to travel around the city on a donkey, and the donkey turned up, he would go to Mass over at St Mary's Cathedral. The donkey turned up on the day of the funeral and followed the procession. He was buried at what is now Central Railway Station, and the tombstone was moved to Botany Cemetery. It's a very poignant, lovely story.
Gosh, quite a man.
Yes.
Archbishop John Bede Polding celebrated the inaugural solemn Mass at St Patrick's on the 18th of March 1844, the day after St Patrick's Day. The Saint's Day was purposely avoided for fear drunken revellers or religious bigotry might mar the solemn occasion. Irish pioneer priest Archdeacon John McEncroe was the first parish priest. He was regarded as a hero by the convict population.
McEncroe was a forward thinker and quite a remarkable man. He was the fourth Catholic priest to operate in the colony. And he recalls that in his first 3 years as a pastor, he accompanied 75 men to the gallows. He became alcoholic. Imagine, if you will, what that would have done to your mind and your heart, to stand with these people.
McEncroe overcame his alcoholism and with great compassion was able to minister to others. He became revered as an outstanding churchman. So how did the Marists come to be here?
The Marist fathers, let me very quickly go back. 1816 in France, there was a promise to form a group of men and women who would be in the church as Mary was in the church. In 1836, we were approved as a religious congregation on condition that we came out to the South Seas as missionaries. The Marists arrived here in 1845, and immediately French Marists began to help out in the church as best they could. McEncroe, he formed a very close friendship with those early French Marists, and he asked one of them to be his confessor, actually. And Father Zephyrin Muret, a Marist, heard his last confession before he died on the 22nd of August 1868.
Before his death, McEncroe requested that St Patrick's be entrusted to the care of the French Marists, the order founded in France by Father Jean-Claude Collin.
In September 1868, the Marists began, which brings me to Father Joseph Monnier, whose picture is on the wall there behind you. He's
a very powerful looking man.
Powerful, highly intelligent, energetic. Monnier worked himself to death, literally. At the age of 49, after 6 years in the task of being parish priest, he died. An estimated 40,000 people came to his funeral. They lined the streets and paid their last respects.
What was so special about it?
Look, I would go back to our founder, who died in 1875, and he said Marists must be instruments of mercy. And these guys were instruments of mercy.
None more so than Father Peter Piquet, whom many regarded as a living saint.
Now that same Father Piquet, who came here in 1880 and died in 1936, so he's here for 56 years, he earned the name being Sydney's confessor. People actually were lined up out on the street to come and confession to Father Piquet. Another thing that our founder said, once people have tasted God, all things will look after themselves, which meant you didn't have to concentrate on badgering people and getting them to be moral and behave themselves, but just introduce them to God.
Maybe that's why this church is so loved by a lot of people.
I think it is.
Do you try to follow that?
That is my pastoral compass. Help people through my preaching, through my teaching, through whatever I do, whatever I am. Help people to appreciate that God is love. There's only one question that God asks of us all, I think it is. Let me love you. That's it. That's it.
Over the decades, other French Marists would make their mark at St Patrick's, leaving a legacy that remains today. New Zealander Father Daniel Hurley was the first non-French Marist at St Pat's. And in 1945, Father Robert Nolan was the first Australian-born Marist to be appointed parish priest. During his term, St Patrick's was formally consecrated, more than 100 years after its opening. Meanwhile, a band of dedicated religious sisters had also been making their mark at St Patrick's in education. The Sisters of Mercy came here in 1865 under the leadership of a remarkable Englishwoman, Elizabeth McEwen, Mother Mary Ignatius.
The sisters' first convent was right here at Church Hill, and their first schoolroom was over there under St Patrick's Church. They lived on this site until 1999 and ran a primary school at Millers Point, as well as a high school for girls and a business college right next to the church here. For 134 years, the sisters helped thousands of young women find their way into the world of Sydney and beyond.
A short distance from St Patrick's and under its jurisdiction is St Bridget's at Millers Point. Built in 1835 as a school and occasional chapel, St Bridget's is the oldest place of Catholic worship in Australia. The feast day of St Bridget is being marked with the ceremonial blessing of a cross woven in Ireland. It's a replica of crosses St Bridget is said to have woven from reeds as she sat by the bed of a dying pagan chieftain who converted to Christianity in his final hours. St Bridget died in 525 AD and is buried in the grounds of Down Cathedral near her fellow saint and countryman, St Patrick.
So where are you taking it?
Well, here is the great symbol of Irish Catholicism.
Absolutely. So here he is, St Patrick.
Here he is, St Patrick, the 5th century.
With the shamrock.
With the shamrock. And it symbolises really the heart and soul of the tradition here. So a lot of the energy, a lot of the sense of being church is very Irish, but it's tempered by the French Marist influence of mercy and helping people to appreciate how much they are loved by God.
It's a really interesting synergy, isn't it?
It's an amazing synergy.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that the French Marists really cottoned onto Irish culture per se, but they cottoned onto the humanity.
Now, tell me about this baptismal font, which I have to say is one of the most sort of elaborate baptismal fonts I've seen.
There's quite a story.
The baptismal font is crafted from purple-veined marble from France and was donated to St Patrick's by John and Suzanne Hughes in 1882. 175 years after the death of William Davis, baby Claudia Catherine, a member of his family, is being baptised into the faith he strove to preserve and protect. In the beginning, St Patrick's served the Irish Catholic community of the Rocks. Now it attracts Catholics from all over Sydney and the world. Today, bishops from around the country have come to commemorate the preservation of the Blessed Sacrament 200 years ago, and to honour those early Catholics whose courage kept faith alive. Their legacy lives on in this unique parish that offers convenience informed by a rich pastoral tradition. With 39 masses every week and reconciliation on tap, many who come here fondly call it their second church. But to others, St Patrick's will always be their primary place of worship, a spiritual home, offering hospitality and sustenance to all who enter.